I'm just going to replace it with rich bastards. Because if all you're trying to do is claim that the rich bastards in power are the ones that are pulling the strings, then let's just call them rich fucking bastards. You know what I mean? So, in case you hear that and you're like, I didn't think this history guy from 30 years ago was saying rich bastards in his book. That's a cool book. No, no, that's just my ass inserting things. So, right, exactly. And congratulations on that 3 stream streak, Epic Gender. Thank you so much for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. With the French defeated, the British government could turn its attention to tightening control over the colonies. It needed revenues to pay for the war and looked to the colonies for that. Also, the colonial trade had become more and more important to the British economy and more profitable. It had amounted to about £500,000 in 1700, but by 1770 was worth £2.8 million. So the American leadership was less in need of English rule, the English more in need of the colonists' wealth. The elements were there for conflict. The war had brought glory for the generals, death to the privates, wealth to the merchants, and unemployment for the poor. There were 25,000 people living in New York, and there had only been 7,000 in 1720 when the French and Indian War ended. A newspaper editor wrote about the growing number of beggars and wandering poor in the streets of the city. Letters in the papers questioned the distribution of wealth. How often have our streets been covered with thousands of barrels of flour for trade, while our near neighbors can hardly procure enough to make a dumpling to satisfy hunger? End quote. Gary Nash's study of the city tax lists shows that by the early 1770s, the top 5% of Boston's taxpayers control 49% of the city's taxable assets. In Philadelphia and New York, too, wealth was more and more concentrated. Court-recorded wills show that by 1750, the wealthiest people in cities were leaving £20,000, about equivalent to about $5 million today. In Boston, the lower classes began to use the town meeting to vent their grievances. The governor of Massachusetts had written that in these town meetings, quote, the meanest inhabitants by their constant attendance there generally are the majority and outvote the gentlemen, merchants, substantial traders, and all the better part of the inhabitants, end quote. What seems to have happened in Boston is that certain lawyers, editors, and merchants of the upper classes, but excluded from the ruling circles close to England, men like James Otis and Samuel Adams, you know, Samuel Adams, the person with the beer, just saying, they organized a Boston caucus, and through their oratory and their writing, quote, molded laboring class opinion, called the mob into action, and shaped its behavior, end quote. This is Gary Nash's description of Otis, who, he says, quote, keenly aware of the declining fortunes and the resentment of ordinary townspeople, was mirroring as well as molding popular opinion, end quote. We have here a forecast of the long history of American politics, the mobilization of lower-class energy by upper-class politicians for their own purposes. This is not purely deception. It involved in part a genuine recognition of lower-class grievances, which helps to account for its effectiveness as a tactic over the centuries. As Nash put it, quote, James Otis, Samuel Adams, Royal Eyler, Oxenbridge Thatcher, and a host of other Bostonians linked to the artisans and laborers through a network of neighborhood taverns, fire companies, and the caucus, espoused a vision of politics that gave credence to laboring class views and regarded as entirely legitimate the participation of artisans and even laborers in the political process, end quote. In 1762, Otis, speaking against the conservative rulers of the Massachusetts colony, represented by Thomas Hutchinson, gave an example of the kind of rhetoric that a lawyer can use in mobilizing city mechanics and artisans. Quote, I'm forced to get my living by the labor of my hand and the sweat of my brow, as most of you are obliged to go through good report and evil report for bitter bread, earned under the frowns of some who have no natural or divine right to be above me, and entirely owe their grandeur and honor to grinding the faces of the poor. Now, the fact that they said grinding the faces of the poor in something from the 1700s, I'm so here for, because yeah, they're totally just rubbing everybody's faces in the dirt. And it sounds like, grinding like you're in a video game, so I'm here for it. Even though I know they didn't have video games in the 1700s, it sounds like it. I'm here for it. I'm just saying. Let's see. In the chat, had a dream. I found my glasses fucked up. It wasn't real. That's good. That's good that it wasn't real. Oh my gosh. Because that would be awful. I know for my glasses, when I first got my first prescriptions pair, it was like, I want to say after insurance, still like hundreds of dollars. So I could not imagine, in like, my glasses. I would be in a panic mode. So I'm very glad to hear that wasn't real for sure. I tell you, dreams, they can be funky sometimes. At least, it wasn't one of the ones where you're like mad at everybody when you wake up still because, you know, that didn't actually happen. I just do a coffee in the morning. That'll help me keep reading. Boston seems to have been full of class anger in those days. In 1763, in the Boston Gazette, someone wrote that a few persons in power were promoting political projects, quote, for keeping the people poor in order to make them humble, end quote. This accumulated sense of grievance against the rich in Boston may account for the explosiveness of mob action after the Stamp Act of 1765. Through this act, the British were taxing the colonial population to pay for the French War, in which colonists had suffered to expand the British Empire. That summer, a shoemaker named Ebenezer Mackintosh, what a name! Ebenezer like Scrooge, and Mackintosh like, Max. Weird. But that shoemaker, that Ebenezer Mackintosh, led a mob that summer in destroying the house of a rich Boston merchant named Andrew Oliver. 2 weeks later, the crowd turned to the home of Thomas Hutchinson, symbol of the rich bastards who ruled the colonies in the name of England. They smashed up his house with axes, drank the wine in his wine cellar, and looted the house of its furniture and other objects. A report by colony officials to England said that this was part of a larger scheme in which the houses of 15 rich people were to be destroyed as part of, quote, a war of plunder, of general leveling, and taking away the distinction of rich and poor. So, once again, we have that leveling topic coming up here where they're trying to level the playing field. And people have been trying to level the playing field for a long time, and people have been decrying it as just unruly riots for a long time, too. And at this point, we're not talking for the past 100 years. Oh, no, no, no. Keep in mind, we're talking for over 250 years right now. Just saying.